everyone, and welcome to episode number 17 of Exploring Genuine Transformation. My name is Lori Beth, and this show has been going on for almost 4 months. And the main crux of this show, for those of you who are new to watching it, is basically that this show is about interviewing coaches, healers, therapists, thought leaders, anyone who's at the leading edge of the topic of transformation. And the topic, we're really looking at transformation for the sake of waking up, for the sake of freedom, for the sake of having more of yourself, for having more intimacy with life, rather than necessarily getting the things of life that you are going after. Those might come as a byproduct of the deep, juicy work that one may do in the realm of transformation. And this show is really looking at transformation from a different lens than that. So I'm really excited to be interviewing Will Rezin today. I'm going to have him join and then introduce him. So we'll just wait here for him to come.
Hey.
Yay! It worked. I'm always happy when technology works.
Right.
Yeah. Well, welcome.
Thank you.
Yeah.
It's good to be here.
Yeah, I'm really happy to have you on the show today. So I want to just introduce Will to those of you who don't know him. He is a high performance coach and a somatic integration specialist. He's trained in somatic experiencing and uses Jungian archetypical work and Erickson psychology work, and he has actually lots of different things that he draws upon that I'll add into the mix, but karmic astrology, core energy, leadership, training. And I mean, basically what I'm really excited about around having you on the show is that your gift and your art is really about creating lasting change through the body and through rewiring our bodies, our brains, and our nervous system. And so today we're going to be talking about high performance or rewiring, sorry, forgetting the title, rewiring the body through high performance. And that's, when we talk about the body, we're talking about like on every level of your organism and personality. So this is also a topic that's very dear to me, and Will and I have some beautiful overlaps in our work. So it's just exciting to be able to have this, in my opinion, this leading edge conversation with you. So
yeah, likewise. In our chat when we were talking last week, it seemed like there was an instant connection in our excitement, our shared excitement about this particular topic. So
yeah. So actually, I mean, what's so beautiful for me about doing these interviews is that I meet with the person that I'm interviewing the week before, and we tend to already begin a really juicy conversation that then gets to continue. So that was definitely the case for Will and I. So really curious about where this will go today. There's always the magic of sort of what unfolds and who's watching and what they need to hear. So what I'd love to begin with is I just would love for you to give people, I mean, both like maybe adding to what I said about what you do and also what your own personal journey is and how it led you to do this work.
Yeah. I like to say I'm helping people to come home to themselves. And there's so many different ways that we can say that. The restitching of the fabric of the psyche, the integrating of our body and our mind, our full experience of being human here in the world. And my journey in life has led to exploring what it means to be a human being. I think a lot of us do that, some of
Mm-hmm.
us more consciously than others. And it began very unconsciously, um, through early life was great, but in my teenage years, I experienced a lot of turmoil, and some trauma and some really significant events that at the time, shaped how I was in relationship with the world. And in my late teens and my early 20s, I began experimenting with psychedelics. And so I didn't know
Mm-hmm.
then that that would be leading me in the direction that I'm, have been moving. But it was there was an underlying curiosity about my nature as a human being.
Mm-hmm.
And it started with the curiosity about my own psychology and the curiosity about culture everywhere in the world, and then an exploration of experience. And in the beginning, it was running away from my pain,
Mm-hmm.
moving away from it with smoking lots of weed, drinking alcohol, experimenting with an assortment of different drugs and psychedelics, long bouts of use of psychedelics. Um, and through that, I came to this deeper understanding of the mechanisms of me. And all the while exploring these, like, intermittent, within this was an exploration of mysticism, esoteric arts, psychology, anatomy, physiology, and all these different facets of what make us who we are. Um, I didn't realize that there was a profession that really lent itself to this kind of work called coaching.
Mm-hmm.
um, I thought I had to go through school, get a degree in psychology, take the route that you took.
Mm-hmm.
Um, become a counselor, become a therapist, become a helper in that way. And
Mm-hmm.
I really didn't want, I was very resistant to that. So I continued resisting it. I was going to be a rock star. That was my thing when I was getting out of college. Nah, I mean, not college, I'm sorry, high school. I did a little bit of college and I'm like, no, don't want to do this. Just want to go and explore living. And I had these memories of, like, wanting to come home, but not knowing where home is,
Ah.
wanting to go home, but not really knowing where that home is.
Mm-hmm.
And in the beginning, I identified it as like a wanting to go back to my spiritual home, wanting to transition consciously into another dimension or another state of consciousness or vibrate high enough. This
Mm-hmm.
is back in early 2000. Really exploring this edge that's become popular now.
Mm-hmm.
And through time, I realized that what had happened was that I had become disconnected from myself. And the coming home that I was in search of was the coming home to me, to
Mm-hmm.
my experience of the world, to my somatic experience of living. And throughout life, like we were talking about this, the adaptations of the organism, right? We adapt based on our environment. And there was lots of good in my environment, and then there was lots of stress in my environment. And so I adapted. Um, Not to get too far off topic. So what led me here to where I am today, I had over the years stacked on top of each other different patterns. I was 100 pounds heavier.
Mm-hmm.
Um, all these different habits to avoid feeling myself, to avoid being in my body, to avoid connecting with my emotions, to avoid expressing myself, and so on and so forth. The list is fairly long. And I had an injury, and before the injury, I had started working with some mentors, and that was when I when it moved from being something that in my thinking mind, I conceptually understood, the process of awakening, as we might call it, or the process of coming home to ourselves, or psychology and personal development, and all these different facets of things I'd been studying, and I intellectually understood them. But it wasn't until when I began working with these mentors that it became more of an embodied experience. And I injured myself. Well, I had an injury. My body was screaming for me to change and pay attention to it. And I worked with opera companies for a while. And I was working on this opera, and I squatted down and I leaned over and I plugged an extension cord into a wall, just like squatting, leaning. And then when I moved back to the squatting position and stood up, I kind of stood up and I was like, and I was stuck. Something had happened in my lower back and I couldn't stand all the way up. And I tried to force myself, and it was this excruciating pain. And I drove myself to a chiropractor's office. She did some work on me, but we couldn't figure out what was wrong. And I couldn't get off of the table, the chiropractic table. I couldn't stand because I was in so much pain. And up until that point, I had never felt pain like that. And I ended up being hospitalized for 3 days. And I think they thought I was drug seeking because I don't even remember what it was that they gave me. They gave me, I think it was probably morphine or Dilaudid or something, this really, really strong painkiller. And I was still coherent completely and talking to them like we're talking right now. I'm like, I don't know. You gave me stuff, but it's not working. Like, I couldn't move. I couldn't sit up. I couldn't stand. I didn't go to the bathroom for 3 days. It was crazy. After that, I began this journey of exploration, body exploration. Like, what is my body saying to me? I understand this intellectually, but now it's real for me. What's my body saying? And I went and I lived with some of my mentors for 45 days and did this immersive experience, exploring astrology and psychology and the Ericksonian hypnosis and past life regression, hypnotic regression, induction, archetypal symbology of plants and animals and sensations and colors and emotions, and really getting into my emotional state. And after that, I began rapidly losing weight. I didn't change that much of my behaviors, but I changed what was going on inside. And I knew, I was like, this is the quintessential knowing moment, you know? It's like things are going to be different. A relationship had just ended, and she'd been sleeping with another guy, and things were chaotic in my life. I didn't know what I was doing. I could no longer do the manual work with the opera companies that I was doing. And I was stage managing a symphony in Virginia, and I couldn't do that. So I had to stop doing it, which meant that my life was taking a new shape. I had chosen not to go to college, to finish college. I went to college, but I chose not to finish it. And so I began learning how to coach. It was through the lens of astrology and psychology. And so I took on a couple clients that year, and I began coaching. And I worked with these mentors for about 2.5 years, fairly regularly, weekly for a period of time, and then monthly, and so on, learning and studying with them. And then I decided that it was time for me to get an official certification. So I went through a coach training program. Now, my mother's a psychotherapist and a trauma specialist, and she explored somatic experiencing before I ever knew what it was. And she's the one who introduced me to it. And she would bring me in, and we would do some work with some of her clients together. And so I learned a ton about how to conceptualize working with a human being and working with really complex cases. So when I stepped into coaching really made sense to me. And it was a natural thing that's always been a part of who I am, where I see things in people's behaviors, I hear things in their language, and I learned how to follow that. And so that led me to the exploration of, like, a deeper exploration of what fundamentally influences our behavior, what really, really influences our behavior. You know, like, and underneath our thoughts, you know, underneath our emotions, is there something else that's influencing or directing our decisions in life? And that's when I began exploring somatic experiencing. And I went and lived in Peru for a while and drank a bunch of ayahuasca and explored that part of things. But for me, it wasn't a big deal at the time. For me, ayahuasca was just another experience of that, the journey space, so to speak. But it's just connecting into that, the unconscious part of us. And I had already done so much of that earlier in life that there are people that come to it that are really wowed from the experience because they haven't had anything like that before. And it is a really powerful experience. But for me, it was powerful, but in a very different way. I was like, oh, I know this. This is familiar. It's different, and this is familiar. And so when I came back, I immersed myself in somatic experiencing, and I've just wandered really deep into attachment theory and developmental psychology and all sorts of things.
Beautiful. I love hearing your journey. It's the first time that I'm getting to hear it. And I'm wondering, like, just as a way of kind of taking that all and I'd love for you to before we get into high performance, I'd love for you to summarize for our viewers, like, through all of those experiences, what is it that you've come to in terms of your own sort of theory of kind of deep healing? Part of what I heard you say in there is that, you know, there's the exploration of, like, let's say awakening, spiritual awakening, and then, but also, like, grounded in the body, you know, and grounded in our felt experience and in actually making the changes. Because it's one thing to kind of, like, have some experience, you know, and people have this a lot on ayahuasca, right? Like, have some experience where there's, like, some expansion, but that it actually doesn't necessarily shift kind of what's going on internally and what's happening with our behavior and what's happening with even just our thought patterns, how we feel about ourselves. And per the topic that we're talking about, you know, how we actually can create more efficient and joyful high performance flow states.
Yeah, how do we anchor that into the body and translate it into something that's lasting change, right?
Yeah, and that I know that you have kind of your own theory, like, you've studied all these things, but I think that, you know, from talking to you, I know that you have your own way of kind of putting it together, which is what makes you unique as a coach. So I'd love for people to be able to hear that, and then I think we can get more into the conversation about how that can create, you know, a more juicy and alive existence and organismic changes and, you know, more high performance states.
Yeah. Well, what I find is that I have a friend who uses this analogy. I don't know if it's his or if it's something he heard somewhere. And he uses it in relationship with medicine, but we can take it in how we think about ourselves as humans. Medicine, Western medicine, has a tendency to compartmentalize specialties. Like, we'll look at the brain, we'll look at the bladder, we'll look at the kidneys, look at the skin, look at the eyes. We've got a different specialist for each. And it's kind of like it's a bouquet of flowers, but they're all these individual flowers. And they're all separate. They're not talking to each other. They're not even really together in the bouquet. they're like 50 different little pots on a table. It takes a lot of space. So what I've found is that an integrated approach where we have these different systems that we're looking at them as a whole instead of the compartments, where they're communicating with each other, that when something's going on with the brain, well, that's probably indicative of something happening somewhere else in the body. And so the reason I'm using this analogy is because the way I think about the self, or an organism or a human being, is that it's an assortment of these different systems, yet the assortment of different systems is the system itself.
Uh-huh. Mm-hmm.
Right? And so we can take a macro view of all the different systems where we can say, oh, this is how everything's functioning together, which gives us this. And then we can go explore the different systems and we can see what's going on with them, but also while retaining this zoomed out view of, wow, this is how the organism itself is expressing as a whole. All these different things are happening. And then that I get curious about, where do we want to make little tweaks? And when we do make little tweaks, what happens to the rest of the system?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
I don't know if I'm answering your question. I'm kind of meandering.
Yeah, I mean,
in the answer
yes.
here.
No, I think that was a beautiful analogy. And what I hear you saying is that, it's the work that you're doing is being able to look at the system as a whole, and like look at us in our wholeness, while also attending to the component parts. Yeah. I don't know if you have an example of even maybe kind of an example of that, or maybe even like a moment of work that you do with somebody just to ground it. I know that the work is complex, but I think that it may.
So I guess what I would say is, when I'm working with somebody, so here's a way that what I do is different than a lot of other coaches. My enrollment process is generally, it can be up to 6 weeks long. It's not a single call. It's not 2 calls. Sometimes it's a whole lot more, because it takes a while for me to get the bigger picture. And I may explore attachment dynamics. I may explore developmental dynamics. I may explore family dynamics. I may explore current life situation. I might explore finance. I might explore relationships. I mean, I want a really broad view of all these different components of the human being. And when I'm working with people, I'm spending time attending to these components. Meanwhile, I'm holding the greater whole. And so it's informing this as I'm constructing this, like, oh, I see, I'm seeing more. It's kind of rounding out the picture for me. And so I have these really large, long containers that I work with people in, because it helps to create enough intimacy so that they feel safe enough for me to get the sense of what's going on and really see it, really feel it, and then work the different edges, because it takes time to work all these different components. Well, I'm not saying that I work them all, but I guess what I mean is that it takes time to get the whole picture, because we're complex creatures. And so in the exploration of these things, something jumps up. Like a client that I worked with, she, after we did a little bit of somatic work, she ended up losing 30 pounds. It just it seemingly melted away. We weren't focused on weight. We weren't focused on anything to do with our body. But what we did is we addressed a core wound, that some component that was hindering that change. She started making more money. It was just a byproduct. So.
And I'm guessing when you say you explored a core wound, it sounds like actually our work is quite similar, but that you explored it through the body. Like it was actually through, but because you have this kind of knowledge of development and of, attachment theory and whatnot, you could actually see when you got to that place, oh, this is actually about something else. And then there was more, being able to hold all of that allowed for a deeper unfolding and unwinding. I think also what you just named is a really great. Oh, go ahead.
Go ahead. Stalemate.
I was just gonna say, I think it's also a great example of the way that the working with the whole organism, and specifically working with the body, can shift, like, it's like we tend to, this is really what this was about with high performance states, which we'll get into, but it's like that way of working can shift the whole organism, and then there's like a falling away, or there can be a falling away of something that's no longer serving, but it naturally happens. Or like you said, like your client's making more money because she just feels more at home in herself and more kind of free to create. And so, I mean, I think it's also, it's a good example of kind of how this deeper way of working, that's really not a top-down approach, and not, it's not the approach that I think is more prevalent in the coaching world as far as I see it, which is like mindset and, shifting your beliefs. And it's going from like the inside of the organism, rewiring the body, rewiring the nervous system. And then those things just naturally happen.
Exactly. And my prediction is that in 50 years, this will all become a knowledge that most people will accept as fact. And I can feel how the research from 50 or 70 years ago, we're just starting to catch up to it. We're just starting to see the long-term data, where science is like, actually, that prediction, it's really actually true. And now we're measuring it. And in 50 years from now, people are going to be like, that stuff, whatever. We know what's really going on with the organism. And when we want to see long-term lasting changes, this is how we impact that. Now, psychology is really, really important. It's an important component, and it's not the only one, right? So like when we want to influence the change that isn't happening, even though we are smart, then we got to go to the body. And sometimes we want to go below the emotions. We want to get into the nervous system. Like, how can we influence and steer the subtle changes?
Yeah, and I mean, I will just add to this conversation that I think psychology has been, even since I went to school, and I was in a somatically oriented graduate program, MFT program, but I feel like there's been a huge shift in the field already that's been happening, that, obviously a lot of therapists are doing trainings like the somatic experiencing training. A lot of trauma work is always considered to happen in the body. And then I think there's a lot of more experiential sort of attachment relational work happening. So it does seem like we are, sort of overall catching up to that way of being. And it seems like, I mean, one of the things that interests me about your, sorry, maybe we're having a delay. I was going to say, one of the things that interests me about your work is that the way I hear it, and I think I have my own version of this, is like, you're at the leading edge, like you're creating your own thing. You're taking what you've learned in all of these different modalities that you've studied and your own life experience. And I imagine that with every single client, you're working a little bit differently, but you're also finding kind of your way of really creating that lasting internal change that then shifts the external.
Yeah, and in some ways I would say, I'm experimenting, and I have been for a couple of years now, and I'm finding certain things that work really well and other things that work less well, and I'm modifying and I'm adapting that. Yeah.
Beautiful. Well, we've spent, obviously this has been a great kind of intro into the entire topic, and I'd love to just spend some time now looking at high performance states, and because I know that you consider yourself a high performance coach, so you're working with people who come to you, I imagine, because they're wanting higher performance and wanting more flow and more ease in their creations. So maybe you could speak a little bit about what high performance means and what it means in the clients that come to you, like how you would define that, and then taking what we've already talked about, how you then support that through that profound organismic and personality and body shift.
Yeah. So most people that come to me think of high performance as doing more, structuring out their day to get the maximum yield out of the minimum use of time, but really using their time in this like methodical way to do as much as possible in their life. And then there's the other side where somebody who did really, really well in school would identify as a high performer, somebody that performs really high, at a high level, somebody that continued to excel at everything that they do. That is their performance driven. Now, the underlying motivation might be a little bit different. We all have our own different motivators, but the theme is that these human beings are really good at what they do, and they want to do even better. Whatever that might mean to them, it might mean growing their company, it might mean enhancing their relationships, but in some way they're looking at optimizing their experience of being alive. And we see this with biohacking and all sorts of other things. And a close friend here, his wife says, biohacking is cool, but biointegration is key. And I completely agree with her statement. I mean, it's Cole Whitty. She's amazing. But really, because it's not that we want to hack away at anything. It's that we want to integrate our experience of being alive. So back up to the original question, why is performance important? Why is high performance something that is important? For me, I believe that it's important that we are able to fully express ourselves in the world. And being able to utilize the full strength and capacity of ourself, of our being alive. There are a lot of things that inhibit that. And many people develop patterns of behavior to push through all of that, to force themselves, and they'll burn out. We see this a lot.
Yeah.
And so to the second half of your question, how do I do that? Like, what's the process like? A lot of times we spend time removing behaviors, things that just aren't serving these human beings, so that their body can actually take a break. And in that, we have more access to flow. We have more access to creativity. We have more access to thinking, because our system is more settled. It doesn't mean that I spend all day watching Netflix or laying in a hammock. It's different than that. We want to help the system to optimize itself and function optimally. And then we can perform. But 3 hours of optimal performance has a tendency to produce a whole lot more than 8 hours of suboptimal performance. And that's great. If you get 5 hours back of your day and you're still getting the similar results, you have this extra time. Time is one of the most precious commodities we have.
I'm curious too, if you could, I love your explanation. And I think it brings up a curiosity for me about, there's one, so I know the experience in my own life of like producing a lot and having that, yes, I got a lot done, but feeling empty, versus really enjoying the process of whatever it is that I produce, whatever that I am creating. And so it's like even more so than what you're saying about like how, yes, it's great to have more time, but like being in the full kind of embodiment and juiciness of the process, of the creative process of, I think about this when I work with clients, it's like that presence, right? That moment to moment experience with someone that is just like, that's my art and my spontaneity. And, that it's just kind of, that to me is a flow state. And so I'm curious about that aspect of it, and if you could speak to that and what you see in your clients in that way.
Well, yes to all of what you're saying there. Life is to be lived.
Mm-hmm.
right? If we're forcing ourselves to do things, we're not really living.
Mm-hmm.
We're living in this when this happens, I will state.
Yeah.
This, it creates this sense of gotta go here, gotta go here, gotta go here, gotta go here, right? But we're not present in the experience, which is what you're speaking to. So when I can be present, fully here, like I am here with you right now. We are here together in this moment.
Mm-hmm.
And as far as I'm concerned, nothing else exists but this moment with you right now. And being able to have that kind of felt sense presence inside myself, that changes my experience of the moment to moment of my day. Right. And when I'm in my creative flow, being able to get connected to that because the other noise has been stripped away or
Mm-hmm.
sorted.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe it's not necessarily that we have to strip it away. It's that we've integrated those parts that are nagging or pulling or the extra energy is trying to suppress or whatever it is, you know?
Mm-hmm.
And then that ease, that, wow, I'm here. Oh my God, I'm having a meeting with my boss. I'm fully here in this meeting. I'm fully present with that human being. I can feel my body and I can feel them.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Or I'm fully present with my team, all of my employees. I can be here and I can ask questions. I'm not thinking about the next thing that needs to happen. I'm present. I'm in the room.
Mm-hmm.
You know, there's a humanness that's here. And really what I'm speaking to is intimacy. Intimacy with ourselves, that felt sense experience of loving and connecting to ourselves, safety.
Mm-hmm.
And then being able to create that with somebody else. Oh, the world changes when we have that.
Mm-hmm.
And being able to feel safe in ourselves going there with somebody else.
Mm-hmm.
You know, when I'm working with coaches, when I'm mentoring coaches, oftentimes a lot of the work that we're doing is around their capacity. Like, where's their edge?
Yeah.
Where do they feel safe? Where do they stop feeling safe in the conversation with another human or in the experience with another human being? You know, what is it? Because that's the special place where the growth happens for them. Because the more we can hold with somebody else, the more room there is for that human to expand.
Mm-hmm.
And that happens in connection, happens in relationship.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Well, you're speaking to many important things. One is the importance of the relationship that you have with the person that you're working with, right? And the intimacy that's created there. That obviously, and I know this is another aspect of your work, that then translates to how you are with everyone, right? Like sort of what we're able to do in that healing relationship and that, you know, in that relationship that's solely focused on that. And then the other piece that I think that was what I loved hearing from you, it was so beautiful. And another element of your work, I think, is this piece about, like, what I was hearing was like a total immersion into presence and into that flow state. And that what you're doing with people is you're helping them to integrate all the different parts, all the different wounds, all the different, you know, whether it comes up somatically or in the mind, or this is partly of like working with our whole organism, that keep us from actually being able to be present and in a flow state, which also speaks to high performance, because we're not going to perform well when we have too many parts sort of that are nagging at us. And so, you know, you can, I mean, I think a lot of people will kind of like, oh, I want to perform well, so I'm just going to push this out of my awareness, but then it comes back, right? And then it leaks in. Maybe it doesn't leak in when you're working, but it leaks in a, you know, in your relationship or with, you know, in, or some part of your work that's more challenging for you that brings up more conflict. So there's something, I mean, I really love that. And I would also argue, I mean, I would also say, and I think you probably agree, that the more that we can, like that when we're not addressing those parts, even if they don't feel like they're kind of coming in, they're always going to come back to get us. Like they're always going to somehow leak in somewhere if there's parts of us that we haven't integrated. And so you could, like, someone could be going along and like, oh, I'm super focused and I'm doing this, but then, you know, for example, I mean, this is something that comes up for people a lot. Like they do really well at something and then they hit their upper limit, but they haven't looked at that. So then, you know, their system just goes into something that's extremely challenging. Or they lose all the money that they just, you know, made or whatnot. So yeah, there's just so many different elements of what you're speaking to that feel like important.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you for reflecting that. I agree. There's this guy, a guy I met virtually. His name's Russell Kennedy. He's a neuroscientist, and or a doctor of neurology, I think is what it is. Maybe I'm butchering this. His focus is neurology though, and he described the role of these different parts, components of the brain so well that I'm going to sort of quote what he said. There's the time date stamp part of our brain, the hippocampus, which catalogs information. Like this happened on this time and this date. Right? Like we're here right now, and it's such and such a time. Like let's see, it's 3:45 Central. It's 1:45 Pacific. You know, it's 4:45 Eastern, and so on and so forth. Right, and we are aware of this. Well, if there was something really chaotic happening right now in my life, I might not be aware of that. I might be cataloging that information as though it's happening continuously. And the amygdala would be what's cataloging that information. And the amygdala does not have a sense of time at all. Everything's happening right now all the time. It's always happening right now. And so that can be triggered. The right now state can be triggered when we have stress, which is what you're speaking to, right? So these parts, the parts that just are there, maybe we have a management strategy so that we don't have to deal with it, but it's always there and it compounds over time and it shows up in the body, and the body will give us clues. It's like, hey, check engine, check engine, check engine, check engine light. Oh, you're not taking care of it. Here's this thing that's going wrong. Now it's this thing. And that's the body. And the body's like, hey, you're not dealing with the thing. Right. And then when a little bit of stress shows up, the body responds to it. And it's like, that fucking thing is happening now. And it's like, it's so chaotic, but it's not really. Right. Yeah. But it is in the body. And it's really, really real for us. And so coming full circle to the point that you were making, working with these layers of experience that are stored in the body, working with these layers of story that are, that are part, working on all these components frees up all that other energy that's being used to suppress or repress.
Yeah.
Which means we have more access to our life force. Our body is healthier. We have more energy. We can think clearer. There's so many benefits to it. And then we can do psychological reprogramming. We can do all sorts of things on top.
Beautiful. I'm so glad that you just described all of that. That was such a great explanation of kind of like, it was a deeper explanation of what I was describing in terms of, what happens when you aren't attending to all of who you are, basically, all of what's going on in your experience, and what happens when you can clear that out. Like when you can really address all the parts. So, I mean, I think that we've addressed, in this whole conversation, we've addressed obviously the way that you're working and also high performance. I'm curious, like, if you have even just a couple of tips or recommendations for people watching of how they can begin to, what your kind of best recommendations are for beginning to explore kind of all of who they are, through the body and I know that this work, it's a hard question because I know that this work is best done with another person, and that might be your recommendation. But
I think there are things that we can do as you've probably experienced with some of your meditative practice. I think that there are things that we can do on our own that support our awareness to expand. And
Yeah.
the first thing that I would invite somebody to do, I mean, if they're watching or listening, whichever it is to bring their awareness to their present moment experience in their body. And if that's too much, bring their awareness to their present moment experience of the space where they are. And simply inviting attention. That's it. Our impulse oftentimes is to label our experience. I feel tingly turns into I'm having a panic attack. I just made that up. But
Yeah.
what I'm getting at is
Yeah.
what I'm getting at is that we oftentimes will create a judgment or a label for the experience, and differentiating experience from the label of the experience. That can be a really good place to start. Like, I can sit and I can track my experience of my body with this place of curiosity, just from curiosity. I can observe that sometimes a story comes in about my experience. And then I can come back to and return to my experience again. If it gets overwhelming, I can look around the room and the overwhelm will go away. Like, having a way to help myself do that is really powerful.
Yeah.
Moving my body, that's helpful. But if that overactivates my body, see, I take a breath even as I look around. It just organically happened. It wasn't like I'm like, oh, gotta relax my body. You know, like, that's not a thing that actually works for us. Where it's forced stop. It's not that the softening, that it's an organic thing that happens. Is all of that making sense?
I mean, it's making sense to me. I mean, I'm also hearing what you're saying through the lens of the somatic work, that you do, and the trauma work that I'm also aware of, which is, you know, yes, it's about beginning to track our bodies and our nervous system responses, because that's really what you're speaking to. And yet, for some people, it's so scary to go into the body, and so then part of why it's important to work with somebody, I would say, is that, you know, to begin to go into your body, it's like layers start to unravel, and there are patterns of dysregulation that can come to the fore. And so that's why, you know, that's why I think, just for our viewers, that's why Will's suggesting things like looking around, kind of coming out, orienting out, you know, so that there's not overwhelm. So I think, you know, I often give clients something like a similar, and Ariana also gave a similar response in her interview, you know, a similar sort of exercise. And I think this is one of the reasons that it's so important in doing this work from the inside out, to be working with someone, you know. And it's true even in, you know, I have a long history of doing, this is what he was referencing, meditation practices, but we're also working with teachers at first. Like, it's not just in a, you know, it's not just in a vacuum, because it's so important to learn, how does my nervous system work? Like, what is it like to begin to feel the fullness of my body and of life, you know, in ways that we've all learned to disconnect.
And what do I do with that? How do I hold it? How do I stay present with it? Is it too much? Like, then when it is too much, what do I do? And the reason why I'll speak for me, and probably something similar with Ariana, but the reason why I am so delicate with this is because there's a tenderness that I think is missing from the way that we treat other humans. And that tenderness is essential for safety to be present within us. Not safety in the mind, like, I know I'm safe. I'm talking like the felt sense experience of safety in my body with another human being. And that requires tenderness. And this work that we do, it shakes somebody to the core, sometimes in a really positive way, and sometimes in a way that's frightening and positive, you know? And so I am delicate with it because of how real it is. And in the beginning, when I started doing this work, I wasn't near as delicate with it. Like, I got really excited. It's exciting to be able to guide a person into an experience. It's like an ayahuasca ceremony.
Mhm.
Like within 30 minutes, you're like, oh, whoa, I think I'm gonna throw up, right? And it's like, wow, this is amazing. You're having this cathartic experience. And I've learned that actually that's too much. It's
Mhm.
way too much for the body.
Mhm. Mhm.
That's not actually getting the kind of change
Mhm.
that the human being really wants. What that's doing is it's re-traumatizing the system and training the system to shut down even more.
Mhm.
And that will, and it's the subtle shifts that create the biggest ripples. I know it's a cliche thing that
Yeah,
people
no,
say. It's like,
I say the exact same thing to people. The slower, the faster the work actually happens, you know. The more intimately and intricately we can go into the
yeah,
body and really investigate what's there, you know, with a lot of presence and a lot of, you know, care and awareness. I mean, it also
yeah,
makes sense, yeah, the faster the work goes, but it also makes sense from the level of like we're going into places that were formed in our childhood where we learned to split off,
mm-hmm,
where harm
exactly.
and violence was already done, where we did it to ourselves or we, you know, internalized it from the world around us. And so in my opinion, it's also that we're bringing back, you know, we're actually reparenting ourselves, and through our work with others, you know, there's a reparenting happening of a new way. Like, how would you treat an infant? You know, you would treat an
Yeah,
infant with care. I mean, you might also treat an infant
tenderness.
with clear boundaries, but
Yeah,
that's come from a regulated nervous system. So,
exactly. Well, there's this way that we are gentle and tender and forgiving and patient and kind and loving with infants.
yeah.
And there's a way where we have retracted that from adults
Mm-hmm.
because they should know better.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Like assuming that the mind controls all. And the mind is often in a feedback loop from the body.
Mm-hmm.
We think that we should be able to think our way to change things. And yet, well, people think this. I mean, I don't,
Yeah.
but people think this. And and that's just false.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
In some occasions, there are ways that we can think a change into existence. And it's a necessary component. And adults have a body that's simply the baby nervous system that's grown.
Mm-hmm.
It's taken a different shape. Yet biologically, we still have the same needs. We need to be accepted. It's a biological need. We need to be connected to other human beings. It's a biological need. We need to feel loved. We need to feel safe. Like we need to be embraced. These are all biological needs. It's not even like a psychological thing. It's not like, oh, like I have a need for a relation. No, it's like my body needs to be in proximity to other bodies that it feels safe around so that it can co-regulate so that my immune system is stronger and healthier and so that I'm stronger and healthier and so, you know, all these different things. And I think it's been forgotten.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, thank you. Beautiful. Well, I think that this is a great place to end. And I also will give a big plug for working with Will and for the reasons that we just said, that how important this work is to do with someone who's, you know, highly skilled and trained and is working with you in an intricate way and a you know, gentle, yet, you know, contained way.
Yeah.
So I'd love for you to share, you know, who you're working with and the kind of the offers that you have going on right now, or the opportunities. Mm-hmm.
Sure. Yeah. So, like we've been talking about, I work with high performers, people who are interested in optimizing their experience of being alive. Um, that's how I like to say it, you
That's
know?
actually the best definition of high performance we've had the whole time.
Yes, yes. Optimizing the experience of being alive, right?
Yeah.
Really fully living. And that could take many different shapes, you know, this human, and well, I'll say this. I'm closing 2 clients right now that I've been with for 18 months. We're wrapping up our work together. And that means that I have space that's opening up for 2 people that are ready to take on this work. And I think we were gonna go into this in a second, but I wanted to lead into that because that contextualizes my how,
Sure. Mm-hmm.
what I'm saying here. The work, the humans, the people that I work with, they they're courageous. They have big projects. They love personal development work. They're excited about it, even though they might be a little scared sometimes. And they're highly, highly committed to these kinds of things. And I like to put a little disclaimer about this work, because the changes are real. Sometimes it's scary, and we get intimate in a way that most people haven't had in a long time, if ever. And that's where the deepest change comes from. That depth of intimacy. And so the containers that I hold begin at 6 months, and usually people stay for years. So
Beautiful.
I think that answers your question.
And then people can follow you on Facebook, and do you have a website that you would guide people
to? I do. Yeah, it's Rezin.com. You can find it through my Facebook account. I have it linked on my page. So Facebook's a great place to get in touch with me. And for all of you that are listening, if you're curious about this work, if you want to have a conversation with me, I'm incredibly personable. I answer all my messages. I love connecting with other human beings, and I'm happy to create time to have conversations and to get to know you with no agenda at all, simply because I love people and I love human beings. And so if you're watching and you're curious and you're interested and you want to learn more about what it is that I'm doing, and you don't want to invest in coaching, awesome, reach out. Let me help you on your exploration. Let me point you in the direction of really incredible resources.
Beautiful.
Because I think this is something that the whole world, I want everyone to know this stuff.
Beautiful. Yeah. Well, thank you so much. It's been such a pleasure having you on the show, and I love geeking out with you on these subjects.
I think we could have kept doing this for like another hour, Lori.
Yeah, it's true. We will. I mean, we will on and offline.
Yes.
And thank you everyone for tuning in. Again, my name is Lori Beth, and I have a couple of offers going on right now. And just to say who I am, I'm a psychotherapist, and I'm a somatic and energy healer, and also a trauma specialist. And I do a lot of really deep nervous system rewiring and like work through the body. And my passion, so I have two different offers. One is that I'm doing just flat out trauma healing containers for both men and women. And that's a minimum of 3 months, and really it should be longer, but depending on the kind of trauma, whether it's a more incidental trauma or a chronic relational trauma. And I have my own really specific way of working with trauma, and where there's like pretty quick results from working in a slow, intricate way in the body. And then my other offering is a high touch 6 to 9 month mentorship with women. And again, I'm really, my work is really centered with women around helping women to clear blocks and wounds and old traumas that are in the way of them fully owning their sovereignty and their power, and like just deep self-love, and clearing in the way that we've been talking about today, so that you can fully live the life and enjoy the life that you're here to live. My particular passion and my life experience is really through doing that I call my work Awakening Soul Power Through the Darkness. And it's really about courageously facing all of who we are in order to integrate it. So that work is really, I love working with women who are like women who struggled. This was my journey, struggled for a really, really long time. They've done a lot of different personal growth work, a lot of healing work, and they've really had to face the darkness and still are struggling through it, still experience, nervous system dysregulation and depression and anxiety. I seem to have a really particular art of helping those women move through that and claiming more of who they are through it, and seeing that as their strength, not as like a detriment. And then the other women that I love working with are just women that, are not, maybe they haven't faced the darkness, but in not facing the darkness, they're kind of living in a bit of a whitewashed heaven that, oh, life is okay, but I'm not fully owning who I am, and I'm not fully living my highest joy and my highest purpose purpose can be work, but it can also just be like, you know, who I'm here to be and live the life that I want to be living. So if you're interested in working with me, I would love to also hop on a complimentary call with you and just explore, you know, whether it's a fit. So thank you again, Will, for tuning in.
Thank you.
And
This was
yeah,
fun.
yeah, it was so fun. And I'm sure we'll do it again at some point.
Oh yeah, I'm sure.
All right. Okay. Bye, everyone.